So a bit of paper cutting. Before we get started, the things that you will need a craft knife. I favour a retractable craft knife because I can click the blade out, lock it in place, and then when I'm done, I can click that blade back away. I really like these. They're really safe and you can sharpen them. You can click the blade down to sharpen it as you go. So I like these. You will need your paper cutting practice sheet, which you can download and print from www.catwoodcreates.co.uk. Shamelessly plugging my own website there. And you will need a cutting mat. I favour a self-healing cutting mat. So these are available at craft shops. If you're watching this while we're still in lockdown, these are also available on Amazon and they deliver in a couple of days. So you can get your paws on the retractable craft knife and the self-healing cutting mat can be delivered to you in a couple of days. So let's begin. Before we do any of the fancy ones, which I'm sure are the ones that you're keen to get started on, I always am, let's start with our practice sheet and make sure that we're doing everything really safely. So craft knife, I'm going to click it out. Sorry, I bet you that's a horrible noise on video. Click it out until I've got just a little bit of the blade showing and I'm going to lock it in place. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to use my craft knife. You can either use it like this with your index finger on the top, or you can use it like this, as I would hold a pencil. I tend to do a bit of both. So the first cut I'm going to make on this piece, I'm going to start by cutting out this square, and I'm going to follow the arrows. I'm going to make my cuts in the order that they appear in. So first off, my non-dominant hand, in my case my left hand, is going to be at the top of the paper so that I am cutting away from my hand. I'm going to make that first slice. There's one. Now I'm going to go and make the second one. There's our second slice. So now the third cut. I could go like this. I'm still cutting away from my hand. To give myself the most control over it, I'm going to turn my paper. And when I'm doing paper cutting, I am always turning my piece of work so that every cut I make is cutting away from my hand. So there's my first one cut out. I'm now going to work through all of these. So we're going to cut number one away from our hand. Number two, turn it around a little bit and away from my hand. And number three. Now I am not exerting much force here because my blade is nice and sharp, as yours should be. You don't have to press very hard to cut through the paper. If you're pressing down too hard, you don't have as much control over the blade, and everything that you do while you're doing paper cutting, you want to have the maximum amount of control, because the last thing we want are any accidents. So I've done 1, 2, 3. I'm going to move on to 4, 5 and 6. So again, I'm going to turn the paper. What you never want to do is to be holding your paper here and cutting towards your hand. I know that sounds so obvious, but I think it's worth saying. There we go. There's this piece. Can remove that. So once you've done the first three, you move on to some of the curves, and curves are a little bit harder to do. One of the things that you will find when you're doing, what you might find when you're doing curves, is that instead of getting a really nice smooth line, is that you're, let's see if I can do one on purpose, is that you are, instead of cutting through nicely, that has sort of left a bit of a, it's almost torn the paper and it hasn't cut through very nicely. The reason for that is we were holding our craft knife on a curve. So what you want is you want the knife to always be perfectly perpendicular to the paper, and then as you come around that curve, you're moving your whole hand to give you a nice curve. That's cut through really nicely now. So let's do 2 to show you again. So I'm moving the knife and my arm around so that I'm getting that really nice, really straight line. There's 3. Keep practicing with this, and as I'm saying, if you're finding that you're leaving these little ruches in the paper, these little tiny curves, have a look at your knife position. Is it perfectly perpendicular to your paper, or is it at a bit of an angle? That angle is usually the reason that you're tearing the paper. The other reason could be that your blade isn't quite sharp enough, in which case please change the blade or sharpen the knife as per the instructions on your particular craft knife. So I will continue to do these, and then when I'm completely finished, the nice thing about this is if there are little bits that you've left out, or say you got to the end and you didn't want to do that one because it was just too small and too fiddly, all of that printing will be invisible, because in paper cutting we present the other side. So you always present the side that is unprinted, unmarked. So once you've finished having a go at your paper cutting practice sheet, you will want to move on to other, nicer templates. So I will show you some of my previous work. You may remember this pattern, or if you did some of my previous craft tutorials, you'll recognise this pattern. So this is the cutout version of the flower, and I have mounted this on a piece of contrast cardboard, and I've just used little, can you see that, little sticky fixers, just so that it's slightly raised above the card. So that's something you can do with your paper cuts once they're finished. Now this one is one of the more detailed ones, and I'm showing you this partly because I think this shows something that I said earlier quite nicely. As I was doing this piece, so this is the side I was working on, can you see that there are areas of the grey that according to the design should be cut out? I just decided to omit them. I'd had a really nice time cutting out the squirrels and the owl and the tents, etc. And I just decided that I didn't really want the border. And I'd sort of run out of, I think my fingers were possibly cramping a little bit. So I just decided to leave those bits, and that is entirely up to you, because you always show the other side of your work. Leave off any bits that you fancy. So another one is this lovely fox. So the reason that I'm pointing this one out is if you're doing a more detailed, a more intricate paper cut, one thing to keep in mind is the order in which you make the cuts. So for a piece like this, everyone always wants to cut out the fox first because it's the exciting bit and it's the pretty bit. I would strongly recommend that you cut out all of these little fiddly bits. So I would start by cutting out all of these small areas and then work up to the larger areas. So this piece in the middle I would cut out absolutely last, and I would cut out the circle absolutely last. The reason being that by starting out with these small fiddly bits, you've got the weight of the paper in the centre that keeps everything strong. If you cut this large bit out first, all of your surrounding areas become much weaker. They become really flimsy, and it's a lot easier to tear your work. So start with the little boring bits and work up to the big exciting bits. Now this piece is of a similar design to the one that I showed you earlier, but this just shows it. This is a slightly different hue of card. I printed it onto a pale blue, and it's just on a really nice dark contrast background. But where can you get all of these templates from? Lots of them are available online, so you can download them for free and print them off at home. You can also purchase, I really love this particular papercraft book, and I think all of the examples I just showed you are all from this book. This is available from craft shops, from Waterstones. Again, if you're watching this during lockdown, you can get it on Amazon. And this has, one of the nice things about this is at the back, it's got all of your paper cuts printed onto different coloured paper. So as you cut these out, you'll get the really nice different colours of paper, and they look great. But that is just one of the options. So have a look online and see what sort of paper cutting you want to start with.